You are listening to Thornhedge, authored by T. Kingfisher and narrated to you by Audiobooks with Keeper of Lost Stories. Please subscribe to this channel for more such audiobooks and leave your suggestions for any other audiobook down below in the comment section. Chapter 3. Toddling had been taken by the fairies less than an hour after she was born. There were many precautions in those days for keeping changelings at bay. Bits of cold iron tucked into the blankets, a lodestone hung over the cradle, 3 rowan twigs wrapped in red thread and tucked under the pillow. But Toddling's mother was bleeding heavily, and her ladies swarmed around her, and Toddling was set down in the cradle without any wards at all. By the time the bleeding had stopped, there was a changeling in the crib, and Toddling had been taken into fairy. It is true that sometimes the fairies steal human children for themselves, but Toddling was not one of them. The goal of the thieves was to leave a changeling in the crib, and what became of Toddling afterward was of no concern to them. There are a great many things that can happen to an infant in fairy, and most of them are bad. Toddling was more or less lucky. She was not harvested by the flesh smiths or devoured by redcaps, nor raised in the retinue of a great lord of fairy. Instead, she was thrown to the green teeth, the slimy swamp-dwelling spirits who devour unwary swimmers. Boy children they eat always, girl children they eat mostly. But occasionally their numbers will fall, or one of them will be seized with some murky maternal instinct, and they will raise a child instead. The green teeth gave her the name Toddling. If she had swallowed a mouthful of mother's milk before the fairies took her, things might have been very different. But the first food she ate was a slurry of fish and pondweed, and by the magic of the green teeth she did not die of it. Because she had eaten no human food, because she was barely born, Toddling's flesh was malleable to magic. The green teeth were able to teach her how to lie unmoving in the cold water, with only her eyes above the surface. She could not quite breathe water, but she could hold her breath for many minutes. And she would lie at the bottom of the stream, picking up shiny stones and tickling the bellies of passion fish. At night, or what passed for night in fairy, the green teeth slept in a tangle of long bony limbs and water-weed hair. The oldest of them held Toddling, cradling her with her face just above the surface of the water, and she fell asleep with the sound of frogs croaking in her ears. When she was about 9 years old, as humans would judge it, she learned the trick of toad shape. One of the younger green teeth taught her, a swollen-bodied, spindly-limbed sprite called Duckwhite. Duckwhite was hideous, and her teeth were the color of moss, but she was as patient as water flowing over there. They practiced for weeks holding hands. They stood up, they squatted down over and over, with Duckwhite's magic flowing over them both. At first, Toddling could not quite understand what was happening, and then she began to feel the magic, like water building up behind an earthen dam. It was a trickle, not a torrent, but it grew and grew, and one day, without even realizing how it happened, the magic split into 2 streams. The dam broke, and Toddling dropped down into another shape entirely. Duckwhite clapped her webbed hands together and squalled with delight. The other green teeth swarmed around them, patting Toddling and praising her. She did the trick for them again and again, and the green teeth slapped their bony hands together and called her by the name that she would bear for the rest of her life. Surrounded by child-eating swamp spirits, Toddling felt intensely loved. She was 15 when the hair goddess came for her. The goddess had fur tipped with moonlight and eyes as deep as wells. She came running over the hill, stretching out her long legs, and stopped over the bank of the river. There were 3 of them in the water, the eldest, Duckwhite, and Toddling. The eldest swam to the edge of the bank and bowed deeply to the silver hair. Duckwhite took Toadlin's hand, drew her to the bank, but the grasp of her webbed fingers was tight and frightened. Goddess, said the eldest, in the screaming language of the green teeth. The goddess dipped her head in acknowledgement. Younger sister, she said, I have need for your foundling. Duckwhite cried out in a sudden grief and hid her face behind her hair. She is one of us, said the eldest. It was not a denial of the goddess, only a statement. In 100 years no one will now know that she was not born among the waters. Then I have come in time, said the goddess. I must take her now. I don't want to leave, said Toadling, realizing what was happening. She swallowed. The word foundling had reached down into her heart and made a sound that she did not like. And I do not want to drag you away, said the great silver hair, turning her liquid eyes on Toadling. But we are not always given the choices that we want. Duckwhite moaned and clasped Toadling to her. Her water-weed hair tangled around them both. The eldest waited for a few moments, then gently pulled Toadling away. Duckwhite sobbed black tears into her hands. The ancient green teeth was the oldest of her kind, but her teeth were sharp as razors. She bit Toadling's left palm across the heel of her hand and left a semicircle of tooth marks. Remember us, she said, picking up a handful of river mud and laying it over the wound. Remember us, and if you can, find your way back to us in time. Toadling nodded. Tears were forming in the corners of her eyes and running over her skin, and the bite on her hand smarted under the healing mud. The silver hair took Toadling up on her back. There was no other word for it. Toadling was fairly certain that she had not climbed up on her own, but suddenly she was astride the broad, furry back, and moonlight was pulling up against her skin. The hair nodded to the eldest, touched Duckwhite with her nose, and then turned and dashed away. It was not like riding a horse, not that Toadling ever had seen a horse, but she had ridden the shining black kelpies that lurk on the river banks. And this was not at all like that. It was more like lying in a meadow that happened to be moving at extraordinary speed. The hare ran across the fields of fairy with Toadling lying flat against her back, and things passed long and wordless between them. She would never be able to describe the ride. No one ever asked her, but she would have liked to have the words to fit around it, if only for herself. It was like a dream that went on for many hours, and in the morning the fragments still lay dusted across her shoulders. When they arrived at last at a tall tower, Toadling knew enough to slip down from the goddess's back. Her bare feet made no sound on the cobblestones. Here, said the hare, her eyes glowing silver. Here you stay and learn what you can. Your father's house will have need of you in time. Toadling stared at her palm, at the scrabbled line of tooth marks. What do I care for my father's house? She asked. It was a tiny rebellion, but it was the first one she had ever uttered. The hare flicked her ears. Nothing, she said. Nor may you ever, nor do I, but I do not like suffering and will stop it where I can. And for that you must help me. These people will teach you what you may need to know. She dashed away again. The earth should have rung like a bell under her footfalls, but somehow it did not. Toadling turned. She was in a courtyard. A man was approaching her, holding a lantern. He had a face like a catfish, and the hair that sprouted from his ears moved restlessly like whiskers. I see, he said. I see. I am Master Gurami, and we will begin your schooling here. Toadling's schooling could have gone a great deal better, and the only consolation, perhaps, is that it could not have gone a great deal worse. It was a tiny backwater of the fairy court, but for Toadling it was overwhelming. She was not ignorant. She knew the true names of every plant that grew within 1,000 feet of the river and how to coax them into growth. She knew how to address a grindullo if one swam up from the grim depths of the lake, and she knew the conflicted hearts of kelpies and how to soothe one when it ran mad. She could recite every song and story of the green teeth, braiding them together and unwinding them over the course of night. She could start a bale fire of fish bones and see a tiny piece of the future in the way the spine cracked apart. In the fairy court, these things were useless, and so she was considered stupid. She left the green teeth knowing everything worth knowing about her world and came to the fairy court to find that she knew nothing at all. Toadling had never worn clothing. She had never gone into a tiny room to squat on a board to relieve her. The taste of cooked food was strange on her tongue, and beds were strange, hard things compared to the embrace of water. The hardness of the bed was the least of it, however. Toadling had never slept alone. The green teeth piled together under the water, mostly in a heap. Sometimes it was restless. She would move a little way off, but never far enough that she could not hear the sounds of the other green teeth breathing underwater. The first night in the strange room, Master Kurami pointed to bed and explained that people slept on them. And then he went out and shut the door behind him. And the first letter that Toadling learned in that strange place was loneliness. It took her a year to learn to read, and she was never easy with it. The green teeth had a way of using their necklaces, each bead waking a memory, and that was a little like reading, so the concept was not completely foreign to her. Toadling dreamed sometimes of Duckwhite's webbed fingers stringing letters together one after another. Each word called up would summon a torrent of memories. So much of Toadling's trouble was in concentrating on the present. Every time she read stone, her mind wanted to pull up the round pebbles underneath the river and the mossy overhangs of the banks and the cold flagstones of the courtyard and the grey stone with the hole in it that the eldest had dangled in front of her as an infant. She would be left sitting for many minutes staring at the single word on the page, while memories flowed over her until the teacher snapped, "Stupid," and made her read it over again. Master Gurami was kind to her, some of the others were not. The reading teacher was a small, shaggy, sharp-eyed creature with slitted eyes that hissed and cursed her slowness. Nevertheless, she learned. It was in Toadling's nature to try to please. She learned about clothing and bedding and words written down because the goddess had told her to, because her teachers felt it was important. She learned to speak in polite words instead of squalls and to eat dead food without snatching. She memorized things about the human world that she would need to know. That a king was the ruler and a lord was under him, and the lord's servants under that. She learned that her ideas of beauty were wrong and of no use to anyone. In her world, the eldest was the most beautiful, swollen with power and secrets and the deaths of her enemies. Duckwhite was beautiful, with her patience and her quick, many-jointed fingers. Reed Bones, who had enormously long, thin arms, and who could swim side to side like an eel, swifter than a kelpie could run, was beautiful. Toadling, who was small and slow, and could not breathe water, did not consider herself beautiful, but it hurt to learn that she was homely, and her family were considered among the most hideous of fairy. She had been there for nearly a month before Master Kurami told her what she was. He did it almost by accident. He was trying to teach her a small bit of magic, enough to light a candle, and she was failing wretchedly at it. "This should be easy," he said wearily, rubbing his face, "even for someone born human." "What?" she said. He blinked at her and she at him, and then he said half in a whisper, "Did the green teeth never tell you?" "Tell me what?" And he said the word changeling to her, and it too slipped down into her heart and rang like a bell under her rib cage. He was kind and he did not mean to be cruel. He had no way to know that the word would pluck her away from monsters who had loved her. On the far side of changeling, they did not belong to her. nor she to them. So he told her about the games fairies play with mortals, and the echoes that rang between the two kingdoms, and how she had been born in that other kingdom instead of this one. She felt every word taking her a little farther away from the green teeth and bringing her no closer to the humans she should have been. And it occurred to her at last to ask the question that she should have asked the hair goddess. Who is my father? Master Gurami ran his hands over his long, restless whiskers. A human king, he said. Barely a king at all, in truth. He holds less land than a horse could cross from dawn to noon. She said, Toadling made a gesture toward the window, toward the moon and the sky and the world, and Master Gurami nodded. That's my father's house. They would have need of me. Yes, that is right. I've been watching, and it seems likely. Toadling wrapped her arms around herself. She felt ill and her skin felt dry. She was always dry in this place. She did not care about her father or her mortal kingdom. She wanted running water and deep river hollows, dappled with leaves. It has been 5 days in the mortal world since you were taken. He smiled faintly. And so I have another few years to teach you what I can, and then I will send you back to the mortal world, so that you may arrive on the 7th day to stand as godmother to the child left in your place. Chapter 4. When Toadling heard the sound of hooves, she closed her eyes briefly and thought, not another one. She would not approach this one. She would not. She could not be trusted to speak to humans. Halim had gone away, and if the gods looked kindly on her, he would not come back. She did not think she could handle another one. The hoof beats separated out into 2 beats, one large, one small. Toadling hopped onto the edge of the brambles and looked out. Apparently the gods had other people to look after. It was Halim, and he had brought another mule with him. I won't go out. He will leave soon enough if he doesn't see me. Mr. Toadling, called the knight. Mr. Toadling, it's me, Halim. Will you speak to me again? Go away, said Toadling, standing up and breaking her promise to herself immediately. He turned toward the sound of her voice. By the fine bones of its face, the mule was none too young, and weighed down with bags. I brought things to break curses, he said. I didn't know who cursed you or how, so I brought as many as I could find. He gestured toward the mule. There's Molly and salt and rowan and rue and candles and a knife that my mother's imam said duas over, and also I had it blessed with Benedictine monk who ran the library. So between the two of them it ought to be quite holy by now. I couldn't find a rabbi. Well, I did, but he wanted to come along because he'd never met a fairy, and I thought you wouldn't like that. Toadling began to laugh, because if she didn't, she would cry immediately. I told you I wasn't cursed. Cursed by fortune, cursed by circumstance, cursed to be whatever I am. Halim seemed unbothered by this. We'll work something out. He led the mule and his horse to the place he had camped before and built up a fire. Toadling followed, feeling giddy and despairing and mad. Please, she said, and could not think how to end the sentence, even when he looked up at her and waited. It will be all right, he said, after it became obvious she wasn't going to speak. If I can make it right, I will. She should have told him to leave. She knew it. She sat down at the fire with them and ate bread with salt on it. She had not tasted bread in 200 years. The taste of the salt was so sharp on her tongue that she thought she might cry again. Is that the curse breaking? Asked Halim, watching her closely. It's been a long time since I had salt, she said. The larder lasted me a long time, but eventually it ran out. I should not tell you this. Why not? He knows there is a keep. He knows there is a spell. Why am I trying to hide? He smiled and passed her more salt. She did not think that he could afford it, Salt was very dear and he was a poor knight, but he gave it to her without grudging and she took it gratefully. Tomorrow, said Helene, tomorrow we will try to break the curse. And if, as I keep saying, there is no curse, then I will brave the keep for you, Mistress Toadling. I have brought climbing equipment and an axe. The monk said that there aren't that many curses that can hold up to an axe. He sounds very wise, this monk, said Toadling. I wish he had been wise enough to tell you to stay away. He is as curious as I am. It's a dangerous thing, curiosity. He smiled ruefully. I always thought that I was doing well, so few knights own anything more than their horse and their armor. So they go and fight in tourneys for purses or go off to be mercenaries for coin. And then half the time they gamble it all away after. And I hate gambling and I don't really want to beat other men bloody for a purse. Particularly not when they are friends of mine. But it turns out that if you dangle a mystery in front of me, well, here I am. He made the little head dip that served him for a bow. But you are like any other knight, she said bitterly. You want to rescue the beautiful maiden in the tower? Well, if she's there, I suppose it's only polite to rescue her, though I'm embarrassed to say that some of my fellow knights would probably only be interested if the maiden had a treasure to go along with her. There's no treasure. I didn't think there was. I mostly came for answers, or maybe just a story. Toadling sighed. She did not know how to fight a story. She had learned so many from the Green Teeth and later from Master Kurami, but no one had taught her how to stop one. It occurred to her that she should probably kill Helene in his sleep. The thought came and squatted on her heart, and she skulked away from it. There had been so much killing. The queen and the nursemaid, though not the dog, they had gotten the dog away in time. Perhaps others that they had never found. It seemed likely. And they would all be dead of old age now anyway. Does it matter? Helene smiled at her over the fire, and she took another bite of bread and tasted salt like blood across it. The christening was not lavish. There were no silk ribbons on the baby's basket, no well-wishing throng. There was a priest and the lord, who was only barely a king, and the mother and a handful of servants, and Toadling. She walked into the little chapel expecting to be challenged at every turn, but she was not. Her courage had failed her completely, but her training had not. Master Kurami had drilled her on this. She had practiced 100 times or 1,000. In the last year of her training, he had taken her to a dozen different fairy courts, and at every one, over and over, he had found a door and a room and drilled her on the christening. It was a strange thing, perhaps, to have practiced. It was not like magic or courtesy or the letters that still lay uneasily on her tongue. It would be over in a few minutes, and then what good would that year of her life would have been? But Master Kurami knew what manner of clay he had to shape. And when Toadling stood on steps and looked up at the open doorway, she did not begrudge a single hour of that year. Go up the steps. There are steps in the houses of the Adine, rough-cut stone worn down by feet. I've gone up steps like these before. The doorway was open, and there was a guard on it. He was not a man at arms, though, expecting warfare, but a man barely older than a boy. He gaped at her, presumably because he had just seen her spring up from the ground, a woman clad in cracked clay and toad skin. In the last year of her training, she had been challenged by everything from armed men to magisters, priests who flung holy water in her face, hostile fae, and even once a nun. The hostile fae had been the only ones who could stop her in practice, and Master Kurami had eventually moved on. I doubt they will send anyone to protect a changeling, he said. And if they do, well, I suppose we will simply deal with it somehow. Since Toadling had no idea what that somehow would entail, she was glad to see that it was only a young man. Go past the guard, enchant him if you can, kill him if you must. She held up a hand and said, "Peace," to him. "I mean no harm." His mouth moved, but no sound came. She laid a little charm on him, only a little one. All is well. This is not your problem. His face relaxed. His chin sagged to his chest as if he might fall asleep. Toadling looked past him to the chapel door. In their practice, sometimes it was open, sometimes it was closed. Sometimes there were locks and bars and iron gratings. Sometimes people poured boiling water down on her from the murder holes above. But water had always been her friend. It had coursed over her deliciously wet, the steam hissing delight against her skin, and then puddled at her feet, and Master Gurami had said, "Well," several times, while his long whiskers twitched in surprise. There were no locks or bars or boiling water. Toadling stepped through the door into the chapel where the parents who did not know her were standing over the child who had taken her place. In the morning, as good as it was, Halim brought out his implements for breaking curses. "Tell me at once if it hurts," he said anxiously. Toadling shook her head, bemused at him for his eagerness, and at herself for not running away. "All right," she said, "if this will make you happy." It could not be said that it went well, but neither did it go badly. She sat patiently while he sprinkled holy water on her, and lit candles in her circle and recited verses from the Quran, none of which did anything. "Oh dear," said Halim. "I suppose I should try the Christian prayer to be thorough, but I suspect that my mother wouldn't appreciate it. And I don't know if that's blasphemy or not, and it's probably bad form to blaspheme while you're breaking a curse." "I'll do it," said Toadling, and launched into the Lord's Prayer. "Our Father, who art in heaven," the words twisted around in her throat, as her fairy gift tried to recast them in the modern tongue. She had learned the prayer 200 years ago to please the priest, and the words on her heart were different than the ones on her tongue. Halim waited politely, but nothing happened. "Next," said Toadling. "I'm supposed to hurl this mixture of molly and salt in your face," he said doubtfully. "But that seems quite hostile." "Do it." She closed her eyes. She felt an absurd smile on her face and couldn't quite stop it. He still could not bring himself to hurl the mixture. She felt salt and herbs spatter gently on her cheek. It did exactly nothing. "Last one," said Halim. I suppose I'm supposed to nick you with the blessed knife." She held out her hand. He looked from the knife to her, back to the knife. She was surprised to see he had gone a little green. "Aren't you a knight?" she asked. "Haven't you stabbed people before?" "Very few," he said. "And they were all trying to stab me first." She laughed and took the knife from him. It was not hard. Master Gurami's spells had often involved a drop of blood to bind them. She prodded the ball of her thumb with the tip and felt the skin part. Cold steel was never kind to fairies, but those born humans were safe enough. Her blood was darker and thinner than Halim's would be, and she suspected that the cut would itch for a few days, but that was all. She flipped the knife around and offered him the hilt. "Is the curse broken?" he asked. "There really isn't one," she said. "Not on me." He sighed. "I suppose I'll have to climb the tower then." She winced and her smile faded. How can a man who couldn't bear to even nick me possibly stand up to her? He will get in and see her, and then he will think I have been lying and wake her, and "I wish you wouldn't," she said. "It seems like it's the only way to set you free." Toadling shook her head. "I don't know why you're doing this." "Well," Halim busied himself, putting away the salt and the herbs. "There is a mystery, of course, but also..." "Also?" "I would like to save you." He looked slightly embarrassed by the admission. "I've never been of much use to anyone, you see. I'm not exactly a fair maiden to be saved by a guesting knight," she said. "It's not as if I'm beautiful." "No," said Halim. "I know I should say that you are, because that would be chivalrous, but I'm not handsome either, and I'm not rich, and men don't feel the slightest urge to follow me into battle, and I already told you about the tourneys, so I've failed on most counts as a knight. It would be nice to do something and not fail at it. And you are, he shrugged, interesting and sad." Toadling had been sad for a long time, but she was not used to being interesting. She had been nearly invisible for so long in her father's house that it surprised her. Interesting, she said. Huh. And you look a bit like my friend Faizan used to, when he had done something wrong and was waiting for his mother to find out, said Helene. His mother was much fiercer than mine, but he always said the dread was the worst. The words slid under her ribs like the blessed knife had not. Toadling's breath came out in a short, pained huff. He was not wrong. She had lived in dread for 200 years. She was there. He was going to climb the tower and she could think of no way to stop him. And inside, some tiny mad voice was saying, "Perhaps it will be all right." "Tomorrow," she said shortly. "Bring the knife." "Go through the chapel door," Master Grammy said, "and find the cradle. You must lay this gift on her, that she does no harm." He sat back in the chair, with the firelight lying over his face, casting shadows in violet and gold. Toadling sat as far from the fire as she could, with her feet in a basin of water. It helped her think, and when she could no longer bear to think, it soothed her a little. "Will they try to stop me?" she asked. "A godmother's gift cannot be ungiven, and we will practice," said Grammy firmly. "I will not send you unprepared." And he had not. Toadling could not fault him. The fault was mostly her own. When she stepped through the chapel door, there had been a man standing there, and she thought, "Is that my father?" He wore robes and a cross around his neck. He stood behind the basket, not a cradle at all, just a little woven thing with an infant in it, and his mouth hung open in surprise as he looked at her. Toadling knew that she might have to fight her father, though she was under orders not to kill him. It was important that she not kill him, something the fairies wanted done, or not done, and so Master Gurami had given her a dozen charms to stop a man in his tracks, and one powerful one of healing, in case the fight went ill. This man did not look as if he would try to fight her. He looked old, and the skin around his throat was loose and thick. "What is this?" cried another man, rising up from the floor. He had been kneeling. He was younger and not terribly large, but his clothes were so layered in so many heavy fabrics and furs that it made him look like a barrel. "Who?" And then he looked full in Toadling's face, and his voice stuttered a halt. Toadling thought, "Of course I'm a fool. This is my father. The old man is the priest." Her father, the king. The king's lips twisted back, and she watched emotion slide across his face. Shock, disgust, and finally fear. She wondered if she would be feeling something. "This is my father. This man is my father." But Master Gurami had trained her well. The words landed inside her head, as if muffled by leaves. The deep pool of her soul did not ripple. She waited for him to attack, and with a charm on her tongue. Fear, it turned out, made him courteous. "I beg your pardon, fair one," he said, and put a hand across his chest. "We did not expect to be honored." This too she had practiced. Toadling tilted her head an inch, for fairies do not bow to kings, and said, "I have come with a gift. This is your gift, that you will do no harm to those around you." The words pressed against the back of her teeth, but she did not say them yet. She wondered a moment later how this man managed to be king at all. The lords of fairy kept their emotions sealed behind walls of ironic laughter, and you did not know if one was going to kill you until after you were dead. This little king heard gift, and his face showed greed as naked as an unsheathed sword. "No," said a voice as soft and unsubstantial as a cobweb, and the king and Toadling turned. Her first thought was that a hostile fate had come after all. The woman who faced her had skin so pallid that it was nearly translucent, and she swayed like a willow. The tips of her fingers were nearly blue. A wailing woman, thought Toadling, a creature of omens and portents. She will scream in a moment and the walls will fall. The woman lunged. Toadling stepped back with the charm of defense rising to her lips. She need not have bothered. The woman was not attacking her, but going for the basket. She staggered and half fell across it. Another woman darted forward, catching her elbow. "My lady, stop. You're not to move like that." "No," breathed the pale woman in her cobweb voice. "No, no, no. Leave her alone. Don't curse her, please." Master Kurami had drilled her on people pleading. Toadling looked down at the pale woman and said automatically, I mean no harm. Get back, said the king, sounding angry. The fair one said a gift, not a curse. You know what their gifts are like, said the woman, trying to lift the baby's basket with failing arms. She slumped and the maid tried to hold her up, and the king moved awkwardly, wanting to go forward, but that would make him pass toddling, and would that be considered hostile or disrespectful? Would the fairy take back her offer to give a gift? She read all this on his face, and it was only then belatedly that the truth came to Toadling. They had not drilled on this. The woman was 5 days from the edge of death, and she should not have been out of her bed at all. Master Kurami had not even considered the possibility that she would come to the christening, had not considered the possibility that she could come. Toadling stared down at the woman at her feet. Her lips moved, but she could not say the word aloud. It had no meaning, but it echoed under her lips, under her entire body shook with it. Mother. She knew that she should be feeling something. Her mother was lying across her feet, still reaching for the basket, and there was blood slicking the front of her dress. Her mother had torn something inside, and her movement had opened it up again. And now she was bleeding to death at Toadling's feet. Toadling stared down at her, and her mind was full of waterweed and the eldest holding out a grey stone with a hole in it, and Duck White's webbed hand wrapped around hers. Those had been her mother's. What was his woman to her? What should she be feeling? Something? Nothing? She crouched down and took her mother's hand. Don't curse her, whispered the mortal woman. Please? I won't, said Toadling. It's not a curse, it's a gift. I've come to stop her doing harm. And the magic struck. They had never practiced laying the spell on the changeling. That part could not be practiced. It was a spell, and she had been given the words, and she had recited them so many times that she could not say them in her sleep. This is your gift, that you will do no harm to those around you. You must say them correctly, said Master Gurami. The magic is bound up in the words. If you say them wrong, you could change the spell, and there will be no second chances. You will do no harm to those around you. You will do no harm to those around you. She had not gotten the words wrong since the first week of practice, and now, in her muddled explanation to the woman who should have been her mother, she had said too much of the words, and she had said them in the wrong order. And now the spell was rising out of her body like a serpent made of steam, writhing into its new shape and wrapping around the basket with the changeling in it. No, whispered Toadling in horror. No, I wasn't done. I didn't mean. The magic sank into the basket. In it, the child moved and opened its eyes. They were as green as poison, and they looked into Toadling's. And the spirit behind them was old and cold and cruel. And it was done. The gift was given. I have come to stop her doing harm. Her mother lay dying on the stones, and Toadling felt the door to Fairy slam closed behind her. To be continued.